In this video, we're going to be breaking down the new DPS tier list as of the mid-season 3 patch. And with all the changes that have happened, plus the ever-changing meta, we got to talk about the best and worst DPS characters that you could be playing. So let's buckle right in and get into it. But do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let's jump in. Now, the first character that we got to talk about is Echo. Now, while Echo is a really powerful character in the right hand, she's incredibly difficult to play, and especially without a mercy, playing her in a hit scan dominated meta is very, very difficult. While I think she could be decent with dive compositions, most of the time Echo is going to get really drowned out and shut down by characters like Ashe, Cassidy, Soldier, and the list goes on. That being said, Echo can still hard carry games with a really powerful ultimate, the ability to punish tanks, and especially if you have that mercy pocket, you can definitely play around a lot of these hit scans, assuming there's only one or a couple of counters on the enemy team. You can all in them, beam them down, and then you're just free to pretty much fly around the map uncontested until they come back from spawn. I'm actually going to put Echo at the top of the C tier. I can see the argument for B, but for the most part, I think that she is a bit underpowered in this season compared to previous ones. Now, we do got to talk about Widowmaker, and especially when we're adding maps like Havana into the map pool, and there are some maps where Widowmaker is just like the best thing to be doing, period. If we're talking about a meta tier list from the top down of play, it makes no sense to put Widowmaker anywhere other than the S tier. She's freaking insanely strong, can take over an entire game, and in the right hands, she is the most powerful thing to be doing. Ball meta or not, you can just completely take over every single one of these sniper maps, and there's a whole bunch of maps where you could hard carry with Widowmaker. Now, that being said, even though I think that Widowmaker is really strong, I think that she has plenty of counters, but I think the character that is actually the strongest DPS in the game right now is actually Tracer, and I'm putting Tracer at the top of the S tier. From the high level point of view, Tracer's phenomenal, incredibly strong at not only playing with wrecking balls but playing with dooms. You can play pretty much Tracer in like any composition and it's fine. On defense, you can do spatial denial. On attack, you can definitely go and make proactive plays, punishing support characters like Kiriko and Zen, unlike any other character on this list. And Tracer is just pound for pound the best at the high ranks of play, and even at any ranks of play. If you have a dive character, Tracer is an amazing character to follow up with that, and works really, really well with characters that want to actually aid in a dive like a Kiriko or a Zen. I'm going to put Tracer in the S tier. She's freaking insanely powerful. So, yeah. Now, we're moving on to the next character, and it's Torb. Now, Torb is actually a really great character for three main reasons. The first one is Torb has a super, super high win rate the lower in rank you go. And I think he's one of the easiest ways to climb if you want to climb out of quote-unquote elo hell, or if you're in a low rank on DPS and you want to get out there as quickly as possible. Torb can do that. Torb has all the means to do that, although this could potentially stunt your growth if you become too over-reliant on Torb. I think he's a really great character to climb with. Now, another thing about Torb that's really strong is he's a character you can get a ton of value with, even if you don't have a lot of the normal or typical fundamentals as other DPS mains. So you don't need high amounts of mechanical skill, and this makes him a prime candidate for, let's say, a high ranked player in tank or maybe a non-mechanical support to still climb. And if mechanical ability isn't your strong suit, you can still climb incredibly high all the way to GM plus with Torb, and that's a fantastic reason. And then the third reason is that Torb is really, really great as an anti-meta pick. Survivable against a lot of one-shots, survivable against dives with Hammonds and other dive characters, good against Tracer. You put all these things together, and Torb is an A-tier character, really, really great right now. Now, we do got to talk about Symmetra, which I think is incredibly underrated, a very, very powerful DPS in the meta. Not only can she be disruptive in just a general dive composition or a general just random composition, whatever it is, it could be anything, but in a brawl composition, she can build up a ton of charge. She can play to build that charge and help her team on the front line. So she has like this duality playstyle that's really, really strong, and I do think that her ultimate is one of the best in the DPS slot. I'm gonna put her at the top of the B tier. I think that you could make the argument that she deserves bottom of A. I might mix her around as we go on with this list, but for now we'll put her here as a general ballpark to understand how strong she is. Now, let's talk about Sombra. Sombra is a lot better than she was before. And I think that especially when we see buffs to Sombra being able to cancel a Brisa ultimate, and we see Sombra playing well with a Hammond and against a Hammond, playing well with the Doom and against the Doom, some of the best tanks in the game right now, you really have to give Sombra a lot of credit. Now, when you compare her directly to a character like Tracer, she doesn't look very good, very strong, but her utility is powerful, and I think that she's a great character to have in your kit to flex to. So I'm actually going to put her at the very bottom of B tier. She's probably going to be at the far bottom of B, but I think that she's still pretty decent. I wouldn't necessarily suggest one-tricking her or anything like that, but great flex character in the right circumstance. Now, we do got to talk about Soldier 76, and while this character doesn't do anything completely broken like some characters can do, I think he's like a great all-arounder. He plays with almost any composition fairly well, kind of flexible, similar to Tracer. In addition to that, I would say it's very hard to do nothing on Soldier. He's always bringing a certain amount of base value to the game, and while you can definitely go above and beyond that, I think he's a really great benchmark for not only new players, but skilled players when their primary characters that they're playing are just not lining up with your composition or the enemy composition, which makes him a really great flexible candidate. And honestly, he's really good against a lot of the fly characters. He's very good against some of the best DPS in the game, like Tracer. And on top of that, the fact that he actually can just run away or disengage from most of the tanks in the game, meaning that he's hard to punish. He outputs a ton of consistent DPS, and I think he's a really, really great character right now. I'm going to put him in the A tier. He'll probably move towards the bottom, but we'll see where he ends up as the list moves on. Next up, we got to talk about Pharah. And if we were talking about Yezin, which, if y'all don't know, is just like one of the most dominant players on ladder right now, who primarily plays Pharah Mercy, yeah, I mean, Pharah would just be insane, right? But if we talk about even the average player at the top in GM, high GM, whatever the case may be, Pharah has a lot of counters. While there are some maps where Pharah is completely dominant on and just takes over the game, I don't really think that Pharah is going to be like meta by any means, nor does anyone want a Pharah meta. Now, if we talk about console gameplay or some of the lower tiers of play, Pharah Mercy can be completely dominant, but from a high rank perspective, she has maps where she's really strong on, but there are many maps that she just sees no play at all. I'm going to put her actually at the bottom of B tier, and I think I'm going to move Sim up to A, and this is where the list is going to go right now. I'm actually putting Echo below Pharah here, primarily because Pharah has some of the most dominant matchups and some of the most dominant maps, while Echo is a more flexible pick, yes, but doesn't abuse the verticality, the fly aspect of the fly characters as much as Pharah does. And if you learn how to properly play around your hit scan counterparts on certain maps with Pharah, you could take over the entire map in the entire game. So I'm putting her a little bit higher here. Now, let's talk about Sojourn, and I think Sojourn's actually really strong. She did get a hitbox change, so she's a little bit easier to duel, and that's really important. I think most for characters like Tracer and Cassidy really have a good time playing against Sojourns now, as opposed to before where it felt like her hitbox was just like freaking unhittable. That doesn't mean this character's bad by any stretch of the imagination. I think she's still one of the best DPS in the freaking game, insanely strong, and Railgun is still just completely dominant. But of course, you're not going to see completely dominant Sojourns until they start hitting consistent rails, which is like high GM plus. So for the most, like for most ranks, for most people, I think that Cassidy and Ashe are just going to be better. But if we talk about a high tier meta tier list, which is what this is, Sojourn definitely deserves high A. I think that that is fair, and I think that Sojourn's really strong. Speaking of which, let's talk about Ashe. And kind of for some of the similar reasons we talked about Sojourn, I think that Ashe is really, really good. She's powerful. She has dynamite consistent damage. Bob got buffed, and that Bob buff is huge. Being able to shoot at a target and Bob not focus on the tank, but focus at that target is a really, really big deal. And Ashe was already looking really, really great. Now, I will say that if you have a pocket, Ashe is just kind of unstoppable and even better. But even without a pocket, I think that Ashe is just really, really good. And the fact that you can one-shot tracers, you can output a ton of pressure, you have mobility, you have long distance, and with that pocket you can even one-shot headshot Widowmakers, which is amazing. I'm actually going to put Ashe at the top of A tier. I think she's just a really, really great DPS right now, looking even better as time goes on. Now, we do got to talk about Mei, and this is a really strange one because I think that for a long time people kind of slept on Mei, and we're kind of waking up to the fact that Mei is insane, especially helping your tank win the tank matchup is such a big deal. Walling off brawl tanks, cutting off enemy line of sight so that you can kill people. Mei is amazing. And of course, her ultimate, we always know that it's really, really strong. Mei's very, very powerful, and I think in the right hands, you can take over a game completely. But unfortunately, I think that many players don't really play Mei to the standard that is necessary, and it's really because people just don't grind this character that much. I'm not entirely sure why people don't play this character more, because she seems severely underrepresented in picks relative to her power. And you know, as far as a meta of what you're gonna see, she would be closer to B or C. But for her power level, I think she probably deserves like low A or even mid A. I'm going to put her at high B here, kind of to split the difference, because I think we should be seeing more Meis. She can just completely take over a game. If you're in a game and your tank is getting tank diffed, Mei can just flip that matchup on its head. There are certain tanks that have to play super, super passive against a Mei, which means that the tanks are not going to be taking over the game. You can just completely shut down an enemy tank carry. There's so many great aspects to Mei. If you need a character to pick up this meta, I highly suggest Mei. Great flex pick in certain situations. So yeah, I'm putting her at the top of B, and I think she could be even higher. Now let's talk about Junkrat. And unfortunately, Junkrat had quite a fall from grace. We've kind of seen this happen ever since his nerf, and while we didn't originally think it was going to hurt him all that bad, it has. Junkrat is seeing less and less play. Characters like Hanzo and Ashe and Sojourn and all the hit scans and Cassidy, whatever the case may be, they all kind of shut Junkrat down. His area denial is not as good when people are playing dive either. While you can occasionally like trap someone with your trap and zone away a wrecking ball, because of how he engages and who he engages with, most of the time Junkrat isn't really going to have a lot of time to spam. And I do think that Junkrat is still decent, but I don't think he's anywhere near as strong as he used to be. And I'm actually going to put Junkrat all the way here in the mid B tier. This one might be a pretty hot take, but I don't think Junkrat's anywhere near as strong as he used to be in the meta. As things have kind of progressed, his one-shot is less reliable, and just overall, I think that there are so many competitive options that Junkrat has kind of just fallen down the wayside. Plus, he doesn't really have a particularly good matchup against some of the dominant tanks right now. So yeah, I'm putting him here. Next off, we got to talk about Genji. And oh boy, this is going to be a controversial one, because it's actually strange, but Genji's actually pretty good right now in a weird way. And the reason that he's good is mainly because, one, we're in a hit scan Zen on a Kiriko meta, right? So like when players are playing hit scans, so like let's say freaking Ashe Widow or Cassidy or like all these hit scan characters, Genji is actually good against these because his deflect can stop their fire, he can make them play into themselves, he can burst them down. In addition to that, when people are playing Zens and Anas and Kirikos, same thing. Genji can not only threaten these characters, but shut these characters down and protect himself with his deflect. And a lot of the tanks that are played, he's also decent against them. There's not a lot of the egregious tank matchups that are seeing play. I think probably Doomfist is a hard matchup, Zara is a hard matchup, Ball's like okay, but he plays really well with dive characters as well. And when you go in with the Doomfist, when he goes in, when he baits out a ton of cooldowns with his power punch, he doesn't really care what goes with him. He just wants something that's going to go with him and clean up, and Genji's great at that. In addition to that, Ball, same thing. When he slams a whole bunch of people, he just wants someone that's going to go in and deal damage to all the people he slammed. Genji's great at that. So like, Genji's actually randomly good, and it's only because of the meta. It's not because of his power, and it's really because he fits some of the characters that are played that are strong around him. So yeah, I'm actually gonna put him here above Junkrat. I know that that's really, really strange, but I actually think that Genji's pretty strong. And yeah, this might be another hot take, but Genji's actually good in some situations. Overall, he's an underpowered character, but the meta has kind of lined up to favor him in a very weird way, mainly because dive tanks are all of a sudden meta. So yeah. Now let's talk about Reaper. Unfortunately, Reaper has kind of fallen and fallen and fallen. Now, I don't think he's actually as bad as some people say. I think he's actually pretty decent in some situations. However, I think that Reaper needs something. I think that when you think about all of the characters that are played, especially a lot of the dominant hit scans, characters like Tracer, Reaper just has a hard time getting in, a hard time doing enough damage and value right away, has a hard time staying alive with his huge ass hitbox, and especially the fact that he doesn't get that movement speed after he gets a kill anymore is a big nerf to Reaper silently. I think that Reaper should get some sort of buff. This is like one of the biggest characters that I think need a buff, because while I do think on some maps he could be okay in the right hands, I don't think that there isn't another character that you could play instead that would do more. I think that you could play Reaper if you're good at him, but I think that another character, if you're good at that character, could always do more. A character like Tracer, a character like a ton of these characters on this list. And while I think that Reaper is still a fantastic character to climb within the lower elos of play, in the top elos of play, he just doesn't see any play. Like, he's just, like, you'll almost never see a Reaper. And yeah, I'm actually going to put him at the bottom of C tier. I'm sorry, Reaper. I'm sorry, Reaper fans. But yeah, maybe we'll get that Reaper buff and we can see some more Reaper play. But yeah, unfortunately, he just doesn't cut it towards the higher end to play. Now, speaking of which, let's talk about Hanzo, who just got a lunge buff. And Hanzo actually weirdly lines up with what people are playing. The reason is Hanzo can contest Tracers, can contest Widows, can contest Ashes, is decent against Torbs, has decent matchups against the majority of DPS in the game, honestly. And yeah, I think it's kind of just about your skill on the character or the tank matchup, or like what tanks you have on your team. Like, you wouldn't want to play Hanzo with any dive tanks, but if you have a Sigma or a Ramattra or even an Orisa or even a Zarya, all of a sudden Hanzo looks pretty decent. And I think that Hanzo is actually really strong. I'm going to put him towards the bottom of A tier. He still doesn't have a passive ability, right? But yeah, I actually think he's not bad right now. I think he's actually pretty slept on. Now we enter the Cass territory. And it's weird to place Cass, because when we think about like the highest tiers of play, like pro play, Cass is not going to see a lot of pro play. But when we think about ranked ladder, even all the way up in GM1 top of 500, Cassidy sees a ton of play. Cassidy is eating up a lot of these top DPS slots just because he's so freaking consistent. He's so strong at shutting down a lot of what is played. And it's weird because there's like a dive meta going on, quote unquote, with Divas and Doomfist and Winston's flying around. But Cassidy is like the one man that stands against all of this stuff. He's great against Hammonds. His sticky grenade is incredibly powerful. And he's just like pound for pound one of the most consistent DPS right now. With that beefy health and his consistent damage and pick potential, I mean, he kind of deserves an S tier. I really think that it's weird. I don't really think that he's as good as some of the DPS that can outrange him. But the numbers don't lie, and the numbers are lining up that Cassidy is like just one of the best characters to be playing right now. And as we go down in rank, like after we leave GM and Masters, then Diamond, and going down and down and down, Cassidy only gets better. He only gets easier compared to the other hit scans. He only gets stronger compared to many of the other DPS in the game. And that means that Cassidy is like really what you should be playing. The majority of you that want to play a hit scan character, Cassidy's him. That's just it. Cassidy is freaking him. Now, next up, let's talk about Bastion. And I understand that you can get value with Bastion up against certain characters. Like, you can shut down and counter bad Winstons and bad Wrecking Balls and bad players and all that stuff. But Bastion can be shut down way too easily. I mean, he can be contested by like half this roster. If people play natural cover, if people play around Bastion's turret form, he could just get shut down. We don't really see that many Bastions in high elo at all. If we do, it's like very few and far between. He's pretty beefy, easy to counter, and as the discipline of the player gets better, he gets weaker and weaker. Like, if we talk about high ranks of play, I think that he would be D. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't find situations here and there to play him, but it's so much less than all these other characters, in my opinion. I think that he's just incredibly niche, but as we go down in ranks, of course, Bastion gets better and better. He punishes a lot of players. He's really great at punishing people that are out of position. He's punishing people that don't manage their cooldowns or that don't respect the Bastion. But he's by no means like anywhere near the consistent value of any of these characters in the higher tiers of play. This one, another controversial one, but you know what? Let me know if you agree or disagree and why in the comments down below. But this is my de facto DPS mid-patch tier list. I think that Some of these picks are going to be a little controversial, but for the most part, I actually think that it's pretty solid. But let me know your opinion about this list in the comments down below. Do you agree or disagree with any of my things that I say? And let me know why. I'm curious about your opinion. Make sure to smash the like, subscribe, and you don't miss out on the tank and the support tier list that will be coming down the pipeline. And yeah, thank you for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.